I'm always torn about how to speak about the future. Um, I kind of like I kind of like starting with this one these days. I live in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and I'm not exaggerating. This is a particularly good example, but I can walk you through my neighborhood on any given day, and you will see somebody's library strewn on the street because it has no value to them insofar as they want to get rid of it. They can't even give it to anybody. They can't take it to a used bookstore. They can't give it to a friend. But this is not a trivial library. I mean, this is, you can probably read this. There's a bunch of really great books there. People are just, and this is a future of the book. I basically think most of our reading is going to shift from paper to screens. But the reason why this is here as a preface to my talk is just to say that when we talk about publishing, we talk about something that occupies a very special place in society. I was in China a long time ago during the Cultural Revolution, and I think among a zillion memorable moments, there was a moment with a big publishing house in Beijing where they said to us, books are not like other manufactured items. They said books occupy a very special role in the culture in terms of mechanisms for moving big ideas around. And I believed that then, I believe it more now. I think that you don't go into publishing to make money, you go into publishing because you want to play a role in the culture. And that, of course, gets directly to the issue of ethics. But I'm going to come back to that. Before I sort of attack the subject of ethics head on, I promised I would do it sort of in the context of my recent work, which is too far ahead, and then sort of come back to some more general ideas. So having spent 15 years or so trying to expand the notion of the page to include audio and video, I started, I don't know, about 10 years ago trying to understand what happens when you locate a text, and you'll see in a minute a movie can be a text in my world, but what happens when you move a text into a browser and let people sort of gather in the margins. And this project is called Social Book. It's been in a sort of very private beta for a couple of years. Everything I'm going to show you in the next 5 minutes is live. Social Book is there. Anybody who wants to can use it. This is a class at NYU. It's a class it's a British literature survey class. The entire syllabus was put into Social Book. There are 85 students in the class. They're divided into 3 sections. This is one of the sections. And when you see, highlighted text, it means that somebody's written a comment. So this student, Dan, wrote that comment referring to this piece of text. 4 students responded to his comment, and what you're seeing here at the bottom is one of the threads in response to him. It works, okay? It's been, thousands of people have tried it. It's a very, very different way of reading. I'll show you a couple of other examples really quickly. This is one, I like this one. This is More's Utopia that a professor put into a Social Book. And I'm reading it by myself, so if you saw highlights, they'd just be mine. But I can switch into the community mode, and I'm now looking at the comments from people all over the world who have put comments into this book. And you can see there are a lot of them. There are 2,470 first level comments. There might be 5,000 or more altogether. We worked very hard to try to give people the ability to have a conversation with people you know, because when that happens, it's a very high signal-to-noise ratio. If Michael and I are in a book together, we're going to pay attention to each other. But there is wisdom in the crowd, so the problem was, how do we do both? And we're working on it. We're getting there, which is sort of to have this closed group sensibility and the larger group, and you can go back and forth, and you can actually communicate. If you see an interesting comment in the broad community, you can comment there and respond. I mentioned that for me, a movie is a text. This is a feature film. If I wanted audio, not for this, but for something else, could I get it?
You kind of have to do it with the
Anyway, feature film. At any point in the time, I can just click the plus button. I could write a comment in here and post it. That's right, I haven't. And as you can see, kids are having the same kind of complex, threaded conversation in the margin of a film as they are in the margin of a novel. When the commercial part of this sort of emerges later this year, Criterion Collection, if you've heard of that, they're going to be putting a bunch of films in. A lot of film companies are. When we first did Social Book, when it was first up and running, people have always told me I should go get my work patented, and I've never pretty much believed in that. But my investors insisted I go to a patent lawyer, and I did. And we showed this to the patent lawyer, and it was very interesting. After they looked at everything, they said, "You know what's patentable here?" I said, "What?" They said, "What's patentable are the rules of etiquette that you're establishing. That I think probably one of the jumping off places for us was Amazon's position back when we were doing this. This would have been about 2010, where Amazon's position was that if you made a comment anywhere in sort of the Amazon system, that it belonged to Amazon, that if you put a comment into a book, that you couldn't take that comment somewhere else, that it actually literally belonged to Amazon. So we thought a lot about this, and I mean, from day one, we had the general rule, which was, well, actually, let me do this, since this is about ethics, let me start a little bit further back than I would normally. When you put a book into Social Book, you can put it up there privately or publicly. If it's private, you're the only one who can start a group around it, and only people who you've invited can invite people into that group. So it's quite limited. But if a book is public, and you start a group around it, you have a choice of whether that discussion is open or closed. What we decided early on was that if you are reading a book that's open, like the one I showed you, the Moore's Utopia, if you're in an open group and your comments are being posted to the open community, our position was they're basically co-owned. You can take them wherever you want, but you can't take them out of the public record. That once you've commented there, you've commented, and that they're no longer yours to take away. I think that's right. In the commenting system itself, we basically followed that, it works such that if you make a comment in Social Book and you post it, even if it's in a private group, if you post it, you can take it, you can delete it, as long as nobody's responded to it. But once somebody has responded to it, then again, it's part of the public record and you can't take it down. I'm a big believer actually in the golden rule, which I sometimes simplify, so it's just be nice or do the right thing. And realistically, sorry, I keep spilling this. Realistically, we are having to work out the relationships of people in a new shared collaborative world of, it's not just reading. You know, the thing that the internet is doing is that it is shifting us out of, 500 years of increasingly individualized culture and moving us quite slowly. It's going to be over the course of, many decades and centuries into a period of collaborative culture. And as we do that, our entire ethical system is going to shift. The general problem that I have talking about the future of the book, which is what I usually get dragged out to talk about, is the question of, are you talking about this year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or a couple of 100 years from now? And my sense is that the most important thing to understand when you are in publishing today, and I don't care where you are in publishing today, but we in publishing, just as we in many, many industries and lines of work around the world, we are inventing a future that is emerging out of digital culture. And there is a huge responsibility that rests on us, basically, to do the right thing. And I would say the most important element in figuring this stuff out is increasingly enlarging the scope of view. Okay, the further out you can see, the better we're going to be at making the changes that might actually be decent and helpful to society over a long run. I'm not sure why I thought this would be fun to look at, but this is Marshall McLuhan from 1975. Let's see if we can hear this.
Another strange effect of this electric environment is the total absence of secrecy. What Nixon refers to as the confidentiality of his role and position is no longer feasible. No form of secrecy is possible at electric speed, whether in the patent world, in the fashion world, or in the political world. The pattern sticks out a mile before anybody says anything about it. At electric speed, everything becomes X-ray.
See, I think that's a really interesting perspective. I think it's a really interesting perspective from 25, almost 40 years ago, because it's today, with all the discussion about secrecy and privacy, there's a tendency to assume that the gold standard of privacy of, let's say, 50 or 100 years ago still stands today. And what I find interesting about what McLuhan is saying here is that when you change the fabric of society so completely as we are changing it with digital technology, that things like how we perceive privacy, that is just going to change. It's going to be completely different. He doesn't prescribe, nor am I going to prescribe what the new forms of privacy should be, but to think that we're just going to sort of go, headlong into the future and have all of the same cultural determinants that we have today is not right. It's not helpful. And I think that so in a lot of ways, what I've been trying to do and sort of increasingly sort of want to devote my energies to is this question of, we know that when print technology emerged 500 years ago, that it gave rise to profound changes in society, right? Nation states, capitalism, our very understanding of what it means to be an individual, all of these things can be seen emerging out of the shifts that occurred in society along with print culture. And so unquestionably, to me anyway, the digital culture is even a bigger shift, and that we literally cannot imagine the world as it's going to develop over the next couple of hundred years. But we know something that they didn't know in 1454, which was that it is going to change, and it's going to change in a big way. And knowing that puts a responsibility on us to really try to be as broad in our thinking as we can. I'm just going to show one more thing, and then hopefully we can have a conversation between us. So this was yesterday. I was at Open Studios in Bushwick, Brooklyn, and I'm going to read this to you because it's just, to me, it's a wonderful piece of writing about somebody who's really trying to think way out there. And I'm not endorsing what she's saying necessarily, but I think it's fantastic to see somebody thinking this way. This work is not for us. It is for the future and robots. That is, each of these pieces takes for granted that computers will outlast their makers, the technology will supplant humanity, and the craft should follow suit. This is art for the singularity. Today, rigorous science and pure math maintain unbridled influence over technology. As such, our digital heirs are slated to inherit nuanced programming and breathtaking technical specifications. Yet we would render a profound disservice by stopping at numeracy and wire. If the earth needs be handed over to machines, we must prepare them not only to be accurate and efficient, but also cultured. Robots need magic. With regard to information density, the mosaic of human social interaction and artistic endeavor is unrivaled in diversity, ambition, and depth. We are bound by duty to pass culture forward, yet remain constrained by limitations. How can we sufficiently communicate this history and dialogue to unknown, unimaginable, and unspecific replacements? This work is an attempt to answer that question, and in fact to begin that process, the process of translating our vast artistic and social history in familiar language and appropriate media to machines, using simple code, recursive structures, redundant patterns, and emergent media in novel combinations. This work transcribes humanity for a future without it. Reading this now probably for the third time, it doesn't have to be machines, okay? Whether it is for machines, for a future without humanity, or if it's for a future with a completely different humanity in terms of its understanding, we still have that responsibility to take our culture, especially the several thousand years of analog culture, and figure out how to bring it with us into the future. I think that's a huge responsibility that we have. And then I think I'll finish with this. This was just, I think, last week, maybe the week before. Stephen Hawking wrote an article in response to Johnny Depp's film Transcendence, and he wrote that success in creating artificial intelligence would be the biggest event in human history. Unfortunately, it might also be the last unless we learn how to avoid the risks. I think it came with that picture. I think it was fantastic that the day sort of started with Michael, and sort of I'm coming towards the end, because Michael Shatzkin and I sort of occupy two ends of a continuum. Michael is an absolute genius when it comes to trying to, understand how legacy publishing companies can deal with the immediate future, like next week, the rest of this year. Whereas I sort of am comfortable thinking about way past the legacy. And the reality is we need both, but the more that you can do one with the other, I'd be better off if I could pay more attention to the present. I think a lot of publishers, it would be great if they looked more into the future. But the reality is that it's a tremendously exciting time to be a publisher, it seems to me, because of the deep, deep social and cultural issues that you're confronting. I mean, it's possible when we look back 100 years from now that the Amazon Hachette moment, will have been a key juncture, and that somebody somewhere along the way may actually, do something original here. I don't think that's that's not what I expect to happen, but it would be fantastic if somebody, let me recommend this to you actually. I'll send it to Michael so he can send it out to you. Matthias Dufner, I think is his name, who's the head of Springer in Germany, wrote a remarkable piece about Amazon and its place in the culture and the need for publishers to fight back. But it was a piece that's written from a perspective that's so much broader than Americans are used to sort of approaching publishing, which is to see it as part of a, sort of a deep social responsibility. Anyway, you guys have been very quiet all day, so if I have 10 minutes left, if anybody wants to say something or ask a question, please do.
Hi. Speaking of the future, what do you think about the lack of diversity in the business of publishing and the authorship, images in children's books? What do you think about that as far as going into the future? My thing is, I think publishers have a ethical responsibility to produce products that are reflective of the country, the society, the culture in which they live.
Yeah, but it's great when you put it that way, because since we live in such a profoundly racist society, then you're not going to see the diversity that you want.
But how is this going to play out in the future? They can't continue on the path that they're on and not producing things that are reflective of this culture.
There's an amazing article, if you haven't seen it yet, by Ta-Nehisi Coates in The Atlantic. It's very long.
Oh, yeah.
People, but yes, it's couched about reparations, but what it's really about is that, until the United States confronts, the history of the oppression of black people, that it's not going to move forward. And so, to me, this is not something that gets fixed inside the publishing industry, right? I mean, this is something that gets fixed in, I don't remember exactly, but certainly in the '60s when black, radical activism took to the streets, we started seeing a lot more pictures of black people in children's books, right? I mean, it came out of the streets, that energy, and I would say that's where it's going to come from now too. I don't see publishers doing the right thing in that sense unless society pushes them. Sorry to be.
Thank you. So what's your prediction, since you work on the very long term, so for the next 5-10 years in terms of the future of the book, the core of what you're working on?
So I wrote a paper about 2 years ago that laid out, Europe is interesting because, I mentioned here this morning, they still, the governments in Holland, Italy, Spain, France, and Germany still protect book publishing. So that Amazon has not made the inroads in those countries that it has here and in the UK and increasingly in other places. And I was talking to a lot of publishers there, and I wrote this paper about how I could imagine developing the first truly post-print publishing platform that over a 5 to 10 year period would overtake Amazon. I've noticed in the last couple of weeks that suddenly, I think it's the Hachette thing that's done it. You know, as people are starting to say in this country even, wow, we really got to do something about Amazon. And I'm not an Amazon hater per se. What I am a lover of, though, is a diverse culture, and monopolies have a tendency sort of to work against that. So I'd like to see Amazon competed with, but for an interesting reason. I mean, I know Mike was saying this morning that he thought Amazon would basically become the world's only major publisher, or maybe it was Amazon with Penguin, I forget, Random Penguin. But I actually think the more the digital culture grows, the more we need publishers. And to me, a publisher is a filter. And filters are incredibly important because the more stuff you have, the more you need somebody to tell you what stuff you should look at. But the reality is that the publishing industry has decided, and I don't know whether it was intentional or not, but they decided to cede their responsibility as filters and have passed it on to, I mean, I was shocked when Michael said this morning that 99% of what's important is published by the big six. I mean, he didn't, in fact, I'm sure he wouldn't want that quoted. But I don't think it's true. My guess is it's almost the opposite. That when we look back 100 years from now on today, my instinct is that 99% of what's important wasn't published by the big six. It was probably published by somebody we don't know of, or a university press, or it was published in the Atlantic. I mean, Atlantic, I don't know if people have been following it, but over the last couple of years, it has become an incredibly important place for serious thinking at a length that people actually can address, which is, it's not a 400-page monograph, it's a 50-page essay. And so I think that there's a huge amount of experimentation that needs to happen, and it's not happening in the big publishers, and Amazon isn't actually promoting it either. So I would like to see something emerge that competes with Amazon. And I've reread the paper the other day. It still makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
You made a small comment about, during your presentation, that you referred to the video as text. And I thought that was interesting because I think one of the things I think about when I think about the future of books is not what I think of as a physical book, and some of that incorporates film and a lot of different types of mediums. So I guess I would just like you to elaborate on what you mean when you stretch the imagination when you say, I think of it all as text.
Yeah, so I'll show you this quick history lesson. Where's Keynote Docs? OCAD.
Get a definition of these words just by touching them, and the definition will appear in the illustration part.
1979. Television, not a computer.
I can get back to the illustration, but in this case it's not a single frame, but it's actually a movie of someone coming into the frame and doing the repair that's described.
So I saw this in 1979, and it kind of blew my mind because suddenly understood that a page could have other things on it than text and pictures. And I started talking about books at that moment being user-driven media, meaning that, you know, I could stay as long as I wanted to on a page. I could flip forward, backwards, and forwards very quickly. Books were random access media in what we call today random access media, right? It was up to me how I used it. At that time, in 1979, movies, television, radio were producer-driven, right? You sat in a chair and it happened to you. You had no control over it. But what was very clear from this work that was going on at MIT in the late 70s was that when microprocessors got put into everything, that all of the traditionally producer-driven media were going to become user-driven. Okay, I remember the first time I took my daughter, when she was about 3, had never had access to a television set. I took her to her grandmother's, but she had access to a video disc player, so she watched movies a lot. I took her to her grandmother's, who put her in front of a television set with a remote, and my daughter kept trying to stop the image because she'd never watched motion pictures where she wasn't in control of it. And I think that from that perspective, it just became clear to me that that experience of being an active reader, right, where you could wrestle with an idea for as long as you had to wrestle with it to make sense of it, that ability was going to be transferred to music and film. And from that perspective, it was more interesting to me, and has been and continues to be, to see the similarities in these different media rather than the differences.
Any burning last question? Thanks, Bob.